does anyone know how many people died on the Golden Gate Bridge during this construction? It's 11. Right towards the end of the construction, some scaffolding fell into the net when people were on the scaffolding, and the net broke and fell through. Back in 1933, they didn't do load tests on safety nets back in those days. So they really were just kind of putting it up and kind of guessing, what weight may go into it. So if you figure 19 plus 11, if you didn't have the net, 19 plus, that'd be 30, 35 million people should have died. You only had 11. That's probably, for back in those days, that was pretty good odds, especially in construction. So, and he was definitely an innovator, which is something I like to see a lot, or try to see, is that, sometimes we deal with these employers that are just, interested in the bottom line. And sometimes when you find an employer, that's actually trying to do the right thing and actually understands that having a good safety program is actually profitable to the bottom line. Really, like I said, I always tell employers, if all of you are that way, you'd be putting us out of business. So, anyways, today we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between the PSM standard and the RMP standard, and there's some subtle differences, I guess we could say, that's in there. Some of them how they're implemented, how we define certain things. The audits, you guys do compliance audits, and so we'll kind of go through those. But I'll start off with kind of just going over the PSM regulation itself. Probably seem pretty similar or pretty familiar to most of you. How many of you ever looked at the PSM standard, the Process Safety Management Standard? Okay, great. Have you ever had any PSM training? Have you had any training in PSM? Okay. This will probably be just a little overview for you. So, anyways, the history of the PSM regulation, history of severe process industry accidents in the period of 74 to 89, prompted legislation to improve safety, emergency planning, and public risk management. The chemical and petroleum industry experienced catastrophic accidents on Flexboro, Seveso, Italy, Mexico City, Bhopal, Pasadena, Tosco, Refinery, BP. Okay. Flexboro, cyclohexane explosion, 29 fatalities. Seveso, Italy, dioxin release with extensive contamination. European Economic Community issues, Seveso Directive regulations. Anyone knows what those are? I know you know. They're basically I call them the foundation of PSM and RMP. Europe actually kind of got regulations out there that they're not quite like ours, but they're a good start, I think, for the industry. And that's a picture of it, or a film of it, actually, in 74. There's a home clip taken back then of the accident. About 2 years ago, Tosco, or actually Tesoro Refining Company in Martinez, had a complete power outage. I mean, their entire refinery lost power all at once. And so they were dumping all excess pressure to the flare systems that they have. The flares were burning off because they weren't getting enough steam to them. They were burning off orange, and black smoke was just billowing out. And my chief at the time called me up and was like, "Oh my God, the Tesoro refinery is on fire." And I was like, "No, yeah." I go, "No, the flares are, not the refinery." And he's like, "Oh, you got people out there? You gonna send people out there?" I'm like, "No, why?" He's like, "Well, you got black smoke burning and you got flames coming out of those flares." Like, yeah, but everything's kept in the system. No one's injured. It's doing what the emergency procedures require them to do. Why would I send anybody out there? Well, all that black smoke, we'll call the air board. That's not my problem. You know, we'll call the air board. So, Mexico City, LPG explosion caused by a leak at a marketing terminal pipeline that ignited and started a fire. Over 650 fatalities at that one. That was part of the spheres that blew apart. Yeah, that was a heck of an explosion. Okay, Bhopal, okay, pesticide plant owned by Union Carbide. Okay, methyl isocyanate released 15,000 gallons, intermittent productive storage tank. Okay, 2,000 fatalities, 100,000 injuries. So I usually have a video. Have you guys ever heard of the Yes Men or the Yes Man on YouTube? They go around and try to embarrass big companies. So one of them was representing Dow Chemical, saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to give all the money back. You're going to sell Union Carbide. We're going to give $900 billion back to the country, and we're going to extradite the CEO, and we're going to do all this." And BBC America is just playing it. They're talking, and didn't realize it was someone who was misrepresenting the company. But Bhopal looks just like that way right now, actually. Maybe a little more grass and weeds and a little dirtier. Phillips Petroleum, seal blow out of an ethylene loop reactor, releasing ethylene isobutane, a compound used in making plastics, 23 fatalities.
At 1:04 p.m. Monday, October 23rd, 1989, an explosion that registered 3.5 on the Richter scale rocked a chemical plant in Pasadena, Texas. On the day of the Pasadena blast, a key valve that isolated a polyethylene reactor from where product collects was closed to permit scheduled maintenance. Somehow, 90,000 pounds of gaseous ethylene isobutane escaped almost instantly from the reactor through the 10-inch valve, pushing at nearly 900 pounds per square inch pressure. Once free, the vapor went searching for an ignition source. Heat is an important part of making plastic, so it didn't have far to go. 23 employees were killed and 314 were injured. The fire took 10 hours to bring under control.
Okay. Whoops. So that was in '89, and after that, Congress got together to develop the Process Safety Management regulation. And concurrently, EPA also got together and was starting to put together the risk management plan. And this one here happened in '99, so let's see. I think the RMP was in full enforcement at '97, I think. I know PSM was '97 as well. They kind of went in at the same time. And 2 years later, we still have, silly things happening. They failed to isolate the naphtha piping from the operating process prior to conducting maintenance work. That involved cutting into or removing a portion of the line. Okay, failure to isolate the line and remove the contents allowed naphtha to flow through the line onto the hot surfaces of the adjoining fractionator tower and ignite. 4 fatalities and 1 seriously injured. There's a lot that could be said about this company. I actually quit a week before this incident occurred. I was with Unical oil refinery. Tosco purchased us. A week before this incident, I had quit. And I'm glad I did, actually. This basically what happened was they had a distillation column kind of going overhead. They had to replace a piece of line. And instead of shutting down the column, they just reduced the rates to keep the level down low in the column. And basically, in a nutshell, an operator walked by, wondered why is this pump off, kicked it on, flew it back up, everything opened, and since they didn't isolate the line they were working on, as soon as it hit air, it auto-ignited. Back in those days, Tosco had a bonus program, which was if you were to do something like this, and the proper procedure would have been isolate the line, bring the column down, isolate the line, repair the line, put it back in service, okay, that's going to cost a certain amount of money to bring that down. But if you could do it, figure out a way to do it online and get it done, okay, then there was a bonus, and they had a bonus program for supervisors to, to find ways of fixing things without bringing the whole unit down or bringing portions of a unit down. And that was probably, that was definitely a contributing, although CalOSHA never determined that. It was when I was working as a consultant, that was one of the things that that had shed some light, was that was a practice that they had. So definitely encourages the supervisors to bypass safety if they know they got a pretty good bonus check coming on the other side. And that's the column there, is all the way at the top. So you had your people, 4 people burned, 1 guy jumped off actually, and so your rescue team actually had to go up there, package them up, and get them down. BP Texas City, 2005. Okay, startup of the isomerization unit, column overfill, 15 fatalities. Okay, basically the Fed OSHA determined they had a poor safety culture, poor PSM, aggressive cost cutting. Okay, CSB also came out with a really good report and actually even better video. So there was a need. It was recognized for performance-oriented process safety management, systematic management of risk through a process of continuous improvement, involvement of workers in process safety, systematic hazard analysis, documentation of process designs and basis and safe operating limits, maintenance, inspection, testing, training, improve communication on risk, other programs. Seem familiar? It's almost identical to what you guys do. So, okay, in 1990, this culminated in 2 significant U.S. federal process safety and risk management regulations and many similar international regs. The purpose of the regulations is to reduce the likelihood and consequence of process safety incidents on workers, the public, and environment through a systematic management process. So what do you think systematic management process? You hear that a lot when we deal with PSM and RMP. Anyone knows what that means?
On a routine basis.
Yeah.
In a certain period is the
So
part of your plant systems or unit systems, management, maintenance, operations, etc.
okay. Yeah, I also look at that as systematic management process is ongoing, and PSM is and subsequently really the RMP. Okay, it's a performance-based regulation, and it's constantly improving, changing, adapting. So what I always tell people, what was good practice, standard mechanical integrity 10 years ago, may be poor practice now, and we may have something entirely new. Okay, and that's kind of one of the good things about the program is that it's constantly, or the standard, is that it's constantly evolving. The bad side of it is when I come up with my Coupa counterparts, sometimes we'll go and say, hey, take a look at that operating procedure. Do you think that's good? I'll be, well, yeah, I don't know. Do you think we should add this? Well, Clyde, maybe you don't need to have that. And it becomes one of those, it can become subjective, if you really think about it. So, which is why we kind of use a lot of the RAGAGEPs, which I think was in the last class. In addition to this federal activity, California implemented similar versions of current federal regulations, obviously the PSM program. Then California had the Accidental Release Prevention, CalARP program. Okay, central to CalOSHA is the avoidance of catastrophic failure. PSM contains requirements for preventing or minimizing the consequences of catastrophic releases. The establishment of process safety management regulations are intended to eliminate, to a substantial degree, the risk to which employees are exposed in refineries, chemical plants, and other facilities. Okay, the standard applies to a process which contains a threshold quantity or greater amount of a toxic or reactive, highly hazardous chemical, as specified in Appendix A. Also, it applies to 10,000 pounds or greater amounts of flammable liquids and gases, and a process activity of manufacturing explosives and pyrotechnics. Now, you guys cover the pyrotechnics and explosive side, or you leave that to EP or the Yeah, fire code. Okay. So for us, it's a it got put in the PSM's reg. There's no TQ on explosives. So if you have, you're making firecrackers, that's considered a process. Process safety management is thought to apply only to petroleum and chemical facilities, but applies to other industries as well. Processing plants, ammonia or chlorine, if it's over the TQ, then it does apply. So I think we have, in the state, I want to say about 1,000, we have 1,450 PSM regulated facilities. Probably 1,000 of those fall under ammonia and chlorine. They're kind of our biggest group. And then that's only the ones with, for us, 10,000 pounds of anhydrous or 1,500 pounds of chlorine. People that operate under that, maybe have 5,000 pounds of ammonia, tend to fall into your guys' jurisdiction. I think the program 1, if I remember right. Are they 2?
Depends on if we have an offsite impact or not. If it's under.
Okay. If it's under 10?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what does not apply to retail facilities? How about you guys? Does the RMP apply to retail facilities, or are retail facilities exempt?
Retail is exempt.
Retail is exempt? Okay. Oil and gas, well and drilling servicing, normally in unoccupied remote facilities. Hydrocarbon fuels used solely for workplace consumption. Flammable liquids stored in atmospheric tanks or transferred, which are kept below their normal boiling point. I'm going to talk go into a little bit about retail sales, because this kind of wrapped you guys up under it to a degree. And I don't think you guys have actually come to a consensus on this. Maybe at your county levels you might have, the ones that I usually deal with, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. But anyways, we're dealing with retail facilities. Back about 4 years ago, we put in we call a Form 9 to change the regulation, because what you'll see is in PSM there is no definition of a retail facility. So we got, that started the ball rolling into some discussions with the Western Plant Health Association. Are any of you familiar with them? Fertilizer, ammonia type fertilizer. Can you guys deal with that? Maybe in the valley. Most of there's a lot in the valley, definitely down through the valley. So what is a retail facility? Okay, it says exception stated. These regulations do not apply to retail facilities. So PSM doesn't apply to retail facilities. So Title 8, Section 158 has no definition of a retail facility, but there is no definition. So it says that retail facilities are exempt, but they don't tell us what they are, okay, or what they're not. So for our understanding, we refer to a decision ruled by in September 2005, matter of appeal of Imperial Grain Growers. This got the ammonia industry, or the fertilizer industry, up on its hindquarters. I mean, they were really upset because they came in, and we'll go through this, but they came in and said, we're retail sale. We're Program 2. We're not PSM. Okay. Background, the employer operates a grain cooperative and sells anhydrous ammonia as fertilizer to farmers. Employer claims that it is exempt from the PSM standard because it's a retail establishment. The employer has 3 storage tanks connected by piping and interconnected through a manifold system. That makes it, I think that would be covered under PSM, and I would even say it's probably covered under RMP. You have an interconnected with a manifold, which means you got a process system, even albeit a very simple one. Okay. Maximum amount of anhydrous ammonia in all 3 tanks would hold 51,000 gallons, or 250 pounds. Obviously, the TQ for ammonia is 10,000 pounds. Federal PSM standard, it states OSHA believes that chemicals in retail facilities are in small volume packages, containers, allotments, making large releases unlikely. So we're telling them, you got 250,000 pounds of anhydrous ammonia, you're running them through a manifold system, and you're filling up nursing tanks and sending them into the farmers, into the field. Well, I don't think that's small packaging. I think small packaging would be like those 5 pounds of propane that we use for 10 pounds of propane we use for our gas grills. Two of the employer's containers held 18,000 gallons and the third 15,000. According to the employer, the primary source of income for the cooperatives is the sale of anhydrous ammonia to farmers to use on their crops. The employer stated that the sale of anhydrous ammonia is to farmers and businesses and not to private individuals for the use in the home. So if you think retail is really kind of more personal, use, not really so much commercial use. So that's what they were kind of stating. Actually, I think what they're trying to say is that farmers were just the same as, regular old retail homeowners. Okay, the employer explained the difference between a level 2 and level 3 RMP program. They say that although both levels overlap, a level 3 program requires a hazard analysis at a cost of about $15,000 to $25,000. I'm assuming that's with a consultant. Whereas hazard analysis for level 2 costs only $10,000. So their whole point to the judge was, if you make us covered under PSM, we got to spend an extra, $25,000 to put together a PHA. And I'm kind of like, I'm in the wrong business if that's what someone's charging you to put together a PHA, But this was a big, big issue for them, and we'll kind of go into this a little bit more. Findings and reasonings, the division satisfied its burden to show the employer did not develop and maintain written safety information. The burden was on the employer to establish that the retail exemption under the PSM standard applies to its facility. The employer did not meet the burden, so he couldn't prove that he was retail facility. I think his business license also had him down as commercial too, which probably didn't help him. Amount of anhydrous ammonia that employers maintain at its site exceed the TQ of 10,000 pounds. Absent an exception, employer is subject to the PSM standard. Although Fed OSHA allows for a retail exemption, no definition of retail is provided. So even the feds don't have a retail exemption, okay, or a definition. Excuse me, they have the exemption, but not the definition. And one of the problems with the feds that gives me some major heartburn, although we don't use them in California, they issue 2 interpretive letters based on its own criteria. It should be noted that the Fed OSHA precedent may provide guidance, but that appeals board need not follow such precedent. Basically, the Fed OSHA person at the time said, oh, all farmers, they're covered under retail, for all of federal interpretations. So, and then another letter was sent out a couple years ago that said, oh, well, that letter was wrong. It's case-by-case basis. So. Okay, California is only required to provide standards at least as effective as those promulgating the Fed OSHA. What that means is that CalOSHA we can be more restrictive, I guess that's a word that employers would use, more restrictive than the feds. So if the feds say, the fall protection is at 7 feet, California can come back and say, no, we want it at 3 feet. Okay, as long as we're more, we can't be less, but. So the judge stated, in this case, it is inconceivable that the 250,000 pounds of anhydrous ammonia held in transfer tanks, such as the ones used by the employer at its grain cooperative, would constitute small volume packaging containers or allotments. The hazard associated with the catastrophic release of an acutely hazardous material, such as anhydrous ammonia, only can be prevented or mitigated if transfer stations, the size of the employers in this case, are regulated under the PSM standard. Otherwise would contravene the purpose of the act and unnecessarily place workers at risk. So a very proactive judge down Southern California basically said, you got 250,000 pounds of ammonia, I'm sorry, you're not a retail facility, you need to have the PSM standard in place. So what did that mean for the fertilizer industry? So Western Plant Health they were beside themselves with this. And we're having arguments about definition of retail sale, not retail sale. Their whole argument was that the RMP, the CUPA, allows us to be program 2. Now you're making us do the PSM standard. And if you make us comply with the PSM regulation, they're going to make us comply with level 3. And I kind of said, well, you got to talk to them. I said, I think you should be level 3. But I said, I said, I'm not going to go up and call every CUPA office in the state and say, hey, if you got ammonia, fertilizer facilities, you need to go check them out. But we do require now all fertilizer companies to be covered under PSM regulation. Now, I did give them like about a year to kind of get into compliance because they were They were all at level 2, and they all looked really good at level 2. They needed to bump up to level 3. So to do that, it didn't take too much of an effort for them, but we gave them a little time to do it. So, but that's one of the things that I think is, I don't know if they said if some of you have ammonia or fertilizer industries in your area, your jurisdiction, but we're covering them under, we're requiring them to have PSM regulations. So.
Is that true also for the propane businesses that are exempt from CalARP under the retail, but did you do the same thing for them?
You know, we did. It depends. I know the propane facility up in Sacramento, about 7 years ago, we covered them under PSM. So, because they had a process to which to fill the propane tanks, and they weren't filling 5-gallon. You know, they're filling the big ones.
Yeah.
So, it was air gas. Matter of fact, I think it was air gas.
So you're saying they should be covered by PSM?
Well, it depends. It depends. Yeah, it depends on what they're doing. So, but if they're
It usually comes in by rail cars or trucks.
and if it's part of a process, then yes, you know, absolutely. So.
You're just filling up smaller containers.
If it's smaller containers, yeah, probably not. They're just transferring it from one tank to another. Probably not. So, some things we haven't kind of tackled yet. They're kind of, you know, hey, sometimes you haven't like like one thought that we have in my office is, do you guys? Well, I'll ask you guys this. Do you guys like this facility here? You got 3 separate tanks. They're interconnected. Oh no, they're not. Excuse me. So you have 3 tanks. They're not interconnected. So you have an ammonia system with 5,000 pounds over here. You got a warehouse, ammonia system with 5,000 pounds over here, maybe a small little building, and ammonia, 5,000 ammonia over there. Okay, but they're running their own little refrigeration systems. Would you still call them at level 3, program 3? So your quantity is 15,000, but it's not total quantity.
EPA would, they'd be general duty, but CalARP has a lower threshold for
Oh. Program 2. Okay, but they'd be programmed. So you wouldn't have them as program 3. That'd be 15,000 pounds, but not interconnected.
But well, still you have to, it has to be like a safety should be derived for that because still you're having, even if it's like you have like little quantities here and there, but you still put under that 10,000 pounds at one site.
So you're looking at the site, total quantity on site. Okay. We kind of right now, we kind of look at it as if this one blows up and it doesn't affect this one, okay, then we'll consider it separate and we won't consider the 2. But if this one blows up and it can affect this one, then we'll consider it. So that's kind of how we, yeah, Chone?
We judge them by process too, not the entire site.
Yeah.
Depends whether they impact the other one.
It's not automatic aggregate for the facility.
Okay.
You made a statement that makes me curious. So California is not subject to federal OSHA.
Correct.
So we don't even have to ever read federal OSHA. We only read California.
Well, you know, I do tell employers that because if they follow the federal OSHA regulations, like I said, now remember, we're California, so we're always more stringent than the feds. So,
Yeah, but you're not under PSM though.
huh?
You're not under PSM, but like CalOSHA doesn't require a triennial compliance audit.
We have something different. Where we meet that equivalent, the equivalent of that, we require an injury illness prevention program. So the feds don't, all employers are required to have an injury illness prevention program. The injury illness prevention program has the same requirements as the compliance audits of Fed OSHA or the RMP. That's why Fed OSHA now is trying to get an IIPP program going for the feds. But we require, you know, identify hazards. In the IIPP, they have to state that they're a PSM facility. Therefore, they have to do a certain amount of audits, you know, inspections and stuff like that to be in compliance with the PSM regulation. So all that gets written up in their, well, phrase that, all that's supposed to get written up in their IIPP. Yeah, yeah. So, so what was the regulatory intent? Was to replace the breakdown maintenance philosophy with an ongoing equipment, piping, and integrity philosophy. Okay, a strong mechanical integrity program and proper operations form the first line of defense against accidental releases from process equipment. And I think that's probably the same for you guys, you know. So we have 13 elements, just like you guys. We've got this process safety information, the PHA. Our PHA can be broken down into a what-if checklist, HAZOP, fault tree. So, huh? Yeah, failure modes and effects, thank you. I have yet to see one of those.
It's not fun.
No, they say, what was it? I think they said NASA uses it. And I think a couple other really, kind of industries like that. But yeah, on day-to-day stuff, I really haven't seen that. PHA, operating procedures, okay, training. Now, operating procedures. So how do you guys, as a curiosity, how do you guys, when you review operating procedures for a facility, how do you go about doing that? Is it, do they just send it into the office and you kind of look through it, and if it looks good, sign off, or do you head out to the facility? All of them are right answers, by the way. So, yeah.
No, I never have them send me operating procedures. I like to look at them with the operator and go over like the emergency shutdown type stuff. But I don't care to look at all the operating.
You know, operating procedures are a, boy, you know, you're kind of a shot in the dark with those. You know, a lot of facilities have so many of them that unless you, like you see, we get to play Monday night quarterback. So if there's an accident, we get to go out there. Oh, look at this. You failed to have this. These two steps in your operating procedure, write your citation. But if we had to do like a planned audit like we do or like you guys do, you know, trying to find that needle in the haystack, it can be a little tough sometimes. So, you know, I always tell people, you know, if you kind of go out there and you miss something and something occurs a year later, don't get on yourself too much. It's really a shot in the dark, you know, when looking at those. But I always have, the only thing I say about operating procedures that I would suggest is I'll usually grab, if I go out on a unit, or if I go, well, it's an ammonia refrigeration facility, because those are pretty common, or a water treatment plant, I'll grab a couple of procedures that seem pretty basic, and I'll go out there with an operator, and I'll go through, and I'll kind of check through and see, I may have to ask, well, is this valve A? And he may say, yeah, okay, got to shut that valve and open this one and bypass this. If I can kind of figure it out okay with a little bit of help from the operator, then I think that's a good procedure, you know. So if I go out there and he's helping me and he goes, oh, yeah, we were supposed to change that, you know, sorry about that. We got to cross that off. And, you know, we jumped from step 4 to step 7. Well, then, you know, we'll have to address that. So training, contractors. Okay, poor contractors. I know in refineries, they get blamed for everything. You know, they just, you know, I kind of have, my heart goes out to them guys sometimes. Pre-startup safety review, mechanical integrity. You know, if you guys work in, I don't know if you guys work in groups or like I have a staff of 8 now, and so usually everyone in my plant or my staff has like a little specialty. Like I've got a lady named Carla Fritz, mechanical integrity. She's the expert on it, you know. I've got another one, operating procedures and PHAs. That's his thing, you know. So if you sometimes because these things are so daunting, you got 13 of them and they're constantly changing on you, you know, if some people tend to take a specialty in a particular section that you can work with, you know, it makes things go a little easier. Hot work permit, management of change, incident investigation, emergency planning and response. See, we have the injury illness prevention program. You have the compliance audit. Employee participation. Okay, our focus, pressure vessels, storage tanks and pumps, piping systems and components, relief and vent systems, emergency shutdown systems, controls, sensors, alarms, interlocks. These are kind of things that we like to play around with. We go off onto a site, whether it's a chlorine facility or a refinery.